Wolfie here, and I have no computer at the moment because our power went out. And every time it does that, if my computer is on, the power goes out. And then, do I have any chat on here? The power goes out, and then my computer goes, oh no, I was improperly shut down. And it takes 40 minutes for it to go through all the checks and boot up. This computer's getting old. So we're going to wait for a few folks to get in here. My glands are sore and swollen, and I don't know why. And I'm kind of, hey, Kathy. Yeah, we've been having storms and rain. It's been really wonderful. The only thing we're going to have to worry about is if the power goes out, is that I'm not going to have any light. So let's get ready. Oh, I'm so sorry. I haven't been sleeping. Hi, Willows. I haven't been sleeping properly. What's today? Tuesday. Sunday night I didn't get to sleep till 6:30 Monday morning, and then I slept from 6:30 until noon, which was 5.5 hours. And then last night I didn't get to bed until 3. I didn't get to sleep until 3 in the morning. And then I got up at 5:30 and then for a pee, and then I went back to sleep, and I got up at about 11:30. It takes me, when I lose a night's sleep, it takes me weeks sometimes to get back on track. But hopefully tonight I will be back on track. Now I'm going to go behind the fan for a minute because I'm here a little bit early. I know I put it up at 9:15, and we'll be reading shortly. Hey, barefoot chickens, barefoot. Linda, hi, Willows. Kathy, wonderful. From Pasadena, hi, Lori. It's broken. I have a green one with green. I have one with blue or turquoise, and the pink one. But I have 2 other black ones, and I can't find them anywhere. I cannot find them anywhere. Oh my goodness. Okay, so just a little rain. Well, our pool went up an inch, and the downspout, how we had it all rigged up and ready for the eaves trough to pour into the pool, and something's stopping it from going, but it doesn't matter. The rain alone put my pool up 1.5 inches easy. So, and my garden's like, thank you. Oh, I love you. Should see, I have a feeling there's going to be a bounty of zucchinis this year. All right, give me a minute and we'll start. Tweedle, tweedle, tweedle-dee. All right. I didn't make my medicated milk today. Oh, no, I'm up to reading, honey. I need, I need to stay up now until 11. And then I'm going to get to sleep. See, I got to sleep at 6:30. Next night it was 3 a.m. Tonight I'm going to be in bed by 11, and I'm hoping to be asleep by midnight. So I got to change my glasses now. Put on the ones with the bifocals. All these computer glasses, and yet I only have 1 pair of bifocals. Isn't that nuts? All right. Welcome to Little House Live, day 11 on the banks of Plum Creek. I do believe the next book is Farmer Boy. I think we should have read it next, but it's after this one. So, all right. On the banks of Plum Creek, going to town. Chapter 30. How they hurried and scurried then. They dressed in their winter best, bundled up in coats and shawls, and climbed into the wagon. The sun shone bright, and the frosty air nipped their noses. Sleet sparkled on the frozen hard ground. Pa was on the wagon seat with Ma and Carrie snug beside him. Laura and Mary wrapped in their shawls around each Laura and Mary wrapped their shawls around each other and snuggled together on their blanket in the bottom of the wagon. Jack sat on the doorstep and watched them go. He knew they would come back soon. Even Sam and David seemed to know that everything was all right now that Pa was home again. They trotted gaily till Pa said, "Whoa!" and hitched them to the hitching posts in front of Mr. Fitch's store. First, Pa paid Mr. Fitch part of the money he owed Mr. Fitch for the boards that built the house. Then he paid for flour and sugar that Mr. Nelson had. Then he paid for the flour and sugar that Mr. Nelson had brought to Ma while Pa was gone. Next, Pa counted out the money that was left, and he and Ma bought Mary's shoes. The shoes were so new and shining on Mary's feet that Laura felt it was not fair that Mary was the oldest. Mary's old shoes would always fit Laura, and Laura would never have new shoes. Then Ma said, "Now a dress for Laura." Laura hurried to Ma at the counter. Mr. Fitch was taking down bolts of beautiful woolen cloth. The winter before, Ma had let out every tuck and seam in Laura's winter dress. This winter, it was very short, and there were holes in the sleeves where Laura's elbows had gone through them because they were so tight. Ma had patched them neatly, and the patches did not show, but in that dress Laura felt skimpy and patched. Still, she had not dreamed of a whole new dress. Can you imagine the gratitude of kids in those days? "What do you think of this golden brown flannel, Laura?" Ma asked. Laura could not speak. Mr. Fitch said, "I guarantee it will wear well." Ma laid some narrow red braid across the golden brown, saying, "I think these 3 rows of this braid around the neck and the cuffs and the waistband. What do you think, Laura? Would that be pretty?" "Oh, yes, Ma," Laura said. She looked up, and her eyes and Pa's bright blue eyes danced together. "Get it, Caroline," Pa said. Mr. Fitch measured out the beautiful golden brown flannel and the red braid. Then Mary must have a new dress, but she did not like anything there. So they crossed the street to Mr. Olson's store. There they found dark blue flannel and narrow gilt braid, which was just what Mary wanted. Gilt means shining. She still got something nicer than Laura, right? Laura and Mary were admiring it while Mr. Olson measured, and when Nellie Olson came in, she was wearing a little fur shoulder cape. "Hello," she said, and sniffed at the blue flannel. She said it was all right for country folks. Then she turned to show off her fur and said, "See what I got?" They looked at it, and Nellie asked, "Don't you wish you had a fur cape, Laura? But your pa couldn't buy you one. Your pa's not a storekeeper." Laura dared not slap Nellie. She was so angry that she could not speak. She did turn her back, and Nellie went away laughing. Ma was buying warm cloth to make a cloak for Carrie. Pa was buying navy beans and flour and cornmeal and salt and sugar and tea. Then he must get the kerosene can filled and stop at the post office. It was afternoon and growing colder before they left town. So Pa hurried Sam and David, and they trotted swiftly all the way home. After the dinner dishes were washed and put away, Ma opened the bundles, and they all enjoyed looking their fill at the pretty dress goods. "I'll make your dresses as quickly as I can, girls," she said, "because now that Pa is home, we'll all be going to Sunday school again." "Where's that gray challis you got for yourself, Caroline?" Pa asked her. Ma flushed pink, and her head bowed while Pa looked at her. "You mean you didn't get it?" He said. Ma flashed at him. "What about your new overcoat for yourself, Charles?" Pa looked uncomfortable. "I know, Caroline," he said, "but there won't be any crops next year when those grasshoppers' eggs hatch, and it's a long time till I can maybe get some work. Next harvest, my old coat's good enough." "That's just what I thought," Ma said, smiling at him. After supper, when night and lamplight came, Pa took his fiddle out of the box and tuned it lovingly. "I have missed this," he said, looking around at them all. Then he began to play. He played "When Johnny Comes Marching Home Again, Hurrah!" He played "The Sweet Little Girl, the Pretty Little Girl, the Girl I Left Behind Me." He played and sang My Old Kentucky Home in Swanee River. When he Then he played, and they all sang with him. Mid pleasures and palaces, though we may roam, be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. Chapter 31. I do have some editing to do tonight, so I don't mind reading a couple of chapters. Chapter 31. Surprise. That was another mild winter without much snow. It was still grasshopper weather, but chill winds blew, the sky was gray, and the best place for little girls was in the cozy house. Pa was gone outdoors all day. He hauled logs and chopped them into wood for the stove. He followed frozen Plum Creek far upstream where nobody lived and set traps along the banks for muskrat, otter, and mink. Every morning, Laura and Mary studied their books and worked sums on the slate. Every afternoon, Ma heard their lessons. She said they were good little scholars, and she was sure when they went to school again they would find that they had kept up with their classes. Every Sunday they went to Sunday school. Laura saw Nellie Olson showing off her fur cape. She remembered that what Nellie had said about Pa, and she burned hot inside. She knew that hot feeling was wicked. She knew she must forgive Nellie, or she would never be an angel. You know, people can't be angels, hey folks. She thought hard about the pictures of beautiful girls in the big paper-covered Bible at home, but they wore long white nightgowns. Not one of them wore a fur cape. One happy Sunday was the Sunday when Reverend Alden came from the eastern Minnesota to preach in the Western Church. He preached for a long time while Laura looked at his soft blue eyes and watched his beard wagging. She hoped he would speak to her after church, and he did. Here are my little country girls, Mary and Laura, he said. He remembered their names. Laura was wearing her new dress that day. The skirt was long enough, and the sleeves were long, too. They made her coat sleeves look shorter than ever, but the red braid on the cuffs was pretty. What a pretty new dress, Laura, the Reverend Alden said. Laura almost forgave Nellie Olson that day. Then came Sundays when the Reverend Alden stayed at his own far church in the... Then came Sundays when Reverend Alden stayed at his own far church, and in Sunday school, Nellie Olson turned up her nose at Laura and flounced her shoulders under her fur cape. Hot wickedness boiled up in Laura again. One afternoon, Ma said that there would be no lessons because they must all get ready to go to town that night. Laura and Mary were astonished. But we never go to town at night, Mary said. There must always be a first time, said Ma. But why must there be, Ma? Laura asked. Why are we going to town at night? It's a surprise, said Ma. Now, no more questions. We must all take baths and be our very nicest. In the middle of the week, Ma brought in the wash tub and heated water for Mary's bath. Then again for Laura's bath, and again for Carrie's. There had never been such scrubbing and scampering and such changing into fresh drawers and petticoats, such brushing of shoes and braiding of hair and tying on of hair ribbons. There had never been such a wondering. Supper was early. After supper, Pa bathed in the bedroom. Laura and Mary put on their new dresses. They knew better than to ask any more questions, but they wondered and whispered together. The wagon box was full of clean hay. Pa put Mary and Laura in it, wrapped blankets around them. He climbed to the seat beside Ma and drove toward town. The stars were small and frosty in the dark sky. The horses' feet clippity-clopped, and the wagon rattled over the hard ground. Pa heard something else. Whoa, he said, pulling up the reins. Sam and David stopped. There was nothing but vast, dark coldness and stillness pricked by stars. Then the stillness blossomed into the loveliest sound. Two clear notes sounded and sounded again. No one moved. Only Sam and David tinkled their bits together and breathed. Those two notes went on full and loud, soft and low. They seemed to be the stars singing. Too soon, Ma murmured. We'd better be getting on, Charles. And the wagon rattled on. Still through its rattling, Laura could hear those swaying notes. Oh, Pa, what is it? She asked, and Pa said, It's the new church bell, Laura. It was for this that Pa had worn his old patch boots. The town seemed to sleep. The stores were dark as Pa drove past them. Then Laura exclaimed, Oh, look at the church! How pretty the church is! The church was full of light. Light spilled out of all its windows and ran out into the darkness from the door when it opened to let someone in. Laura almost jumped out from under the blankets before she remembered that she must never stand up in the wagon when the horses were going. Pa drove to the church steps and helped them all out. He told them to go in, but they waited in the cold until he had covered Sam and David with their blankets. Then he came, and they all went into the church together. Laura's mouth fell open, and her eyes stretched to look at what she saw. She held Mary's hand tightly, and they followed Ma and Pa. They sat down. Then Laura could look with all her might. Standing in front of the crowded benches was a tree. Laura decided it must be a tree. She could see its trunk and branches, but she had never before seen such a tree. Where leaves would be in summer, so it was a bare tree. Where leaves would be in summer, there were clusters and streamers of thin green paper. Thick among them hung little sacks made of pink mosquito bar. Laura was almost sure she could see candy in them. From the branches hung packages wrapped in colored paper. Red packages and pink packages and yellow packages, all tied with colored string. Silk scarves were draped among them. Red mittens hung by the cord that would go around your neck and keep them from getting lost if you were wearing them. A pair of new shoes hung by their heels from a branch. Lavish strings of white popcorn were looped all over this. Under the tree and leaning against it were all kinds of things. Laura saw a crinkly bright washboard, a wooden tub, a churn and dasher, a sled made of new boards, a shovel, and a long-handled pitchfork. Laura was too excited to speak. Remind me to tell you the Christmas tree story after this chapter. Under the tree and leaning against it were all kinds of things. Laura saw a crinkly bright washboard, a wooden tub, a churn and dasher, a sled. Didn't I just read that? Yes, I did. Sorry. Laura was too excited to speak. She squeezed Mary's hand tighter and tighter, and she looked up at Ma, wanting so much to know what that was. Ma smiled down at her and answered, That is a Christmas tree, girls. Do you think it's pretty? They could not answer. They nodded while they kept on looking at that wonderful tree. They were hardly even surprised to know that this was Christmas, though they had not expected Christmas yet because there was not enough snow. Just then, Laura saw the most wonderful thing of all. From a far branch of that tree hung a little fur cape and a muff to match. I used to have a muff. The Reverend Alden was there. He preached about Christmas, but Laura was looking at that tree and she could not hear what he said. Everyone stood up to sing, and Laura stood up, but she could not sing. Not a sound would come out of her throat. In the whole world, there couldn't be a store so wonderful as to look at that, a store so wonderful to look at as that tree. After the singing, Mr. Tower and Mr. Beetle began taking things off it and reading out names. Mrs. Tower and Miss Beetle brought those things down past the benches and gave them to the person whose name was on them. Everything on that tree was a Christmas present for somebody. When Laura knew that, The lamps and people and voices and even the tree began to whirl. They whirled faster, noisier, and more excited. Someone gave her a pink mosquito bar bag. It did have candy in it and a big popcorn ball. Mary had one too. So did Carrie. Every girl and boy had one. Then Mary had a pair of blue mittens. Then Laura had a red pair. Ma opened a big package and there was a warm, big brown and red plaid shawl for her. Pa got a woolly muffler. Then Carrie had a rag doll with a china head. She screamed with joy. Through the laughing and the talking and the rustling of papers, Mr. Beetle and Mr. Tower went on shouting names. The little fur cape and muff still hung on the tree, and Laura wanted them. Yeah, I know too. Me too, Willows. She wanted to look at them as long as she could. She wanted to know who got them. They could not be for Nellie Olson, who already had a fur cape. Laura did not expect anything more, because she got the candy and mittens. And what else did she get? But to Mary came a pretty little booklet with Bible pictures in it from Mrs. Tower. Mr. Tower was taking the little fur cape and the muff from the tree. He read a name, but Laura could not hear it through all the joyful noise. She lost sight of the cape and muff along with all the people. They were gone now. Then to Carrie came a cunning little brown-spotted white china dog. But Carrie's arms and her eyes were full of her doll. So Laura held and stroked and laughed over the sleek little dog. "Merry Christmas, Laura," Miss Beetle said, and in Laura's hand she put a beautiful little box. It was made of snow-white gleaming china. On its top stood a wee gold-covered teapot and a gold-colored tiny cup in a gold-colored saucer. Oh, God, I dream of that, you know. The top of the box lifted off. Inside was a nice place to keep a breast pin if someday Laura had a breast pin. Ma said it was a jewel box. There had never been such a Christmas as this. It was such a large, rich Christmas, the whole church full of Christmas. There were so many lamps, so many people, so much noise and laughter, and so many happinesses in it. Laura felt full and bursting, as if that whole big, rich Christmas were inside her, and her mittens and her beautiful jewel box with the wee gold cup and saucer and teapot, and her candy and her popcorn ball. And suddenly someone said, "These are for you, Laura." I'm sorry. I don't know. Mrs. Tower stood smiling, holding out the little fur cape and muff. God, don't listen to me. Just give me a second. All around her, Christmas went on, but Laura knew only the softness of those furs. People were going home. Carrie was standing on the bench while Ma fastened her coat and tied her hood more snugly. Ma said, "Thank you so much for the shawl, Brother Alden. It's just what I needed." Pa said, "And I thank you for the muffler. It will feel good when I come to town in the cold." The Reverend Alden sat down on the bench and asked, "And does Mary's coat fit?" Laura had not noticed Mary's coat until then. Mary had on a new dark blue coat. It was long and its sleeves came down to Mary's wrists. Mary buttoned it up and it fitted. "And how does this little girl like her furs?" The Reverend Alden smiled. He drew Laura between his knees. He laid the fur cape around her shoulders and fastened it at the throat. He put the cord of the muff around her neck, and her hands went inside the silky muff. "There," Reverend Alden said. "Now my little country girls will be warm when they come to Sunday school." Let's see if my computer's on yet. "What do you say, Laura?" Ma asked. But the Reverend Alden said, "There's no need. The way her eyes are shining is enough." Laura could not speak. The golden brown fur cuddled her neck. and softly hugged her shoulders. Down her front, it hid the threadbare fastenings of her coat. The muff came up to her wrists and hid the shortness of her coat sleeves. She's a little brown bird with red trimmings, Reverend Alden said. Then Laura laughed. It was true. Her hair and her coat, her dress and the wonderful furs were brown. Her hood and mittens and the braid on her dress were red. I'll tell my church people back east about our little brown bird, said the Reverend Alden. You see, when I told them about our church out here, they said they must send a box for the Christmas tree. They gave all the things they had. The little girls who sent you the furs and Mary's coat needed larger ones. Thank you, sir, said Laura. And please, sir, tell them thank you, too. For when she could speak, her manners were as nice as Mary's. They all said good night and Merry Christmas to Reverend Alden. Mary was so beautiful in her Christmas coat. Carrie was so pretty on Pa's arm. And Pa and Ma were smiling so happily, and Laura was all gladness. Mr. and Mrs. Olson were going home too. Mr. Olson's arms were full of things, and so were Nellie's and Willie's. No wickedness boiled up in Laura. Now, She only felt a little bit of mean gladness. Merry Christmas, Nellie, Laura said. Nellie stared while Laura walked quietly on with her hands snug deep in the soft muff. Her cape was prettier than Nellie's, and Nellie had no muff. All right, you want to do one more? Now, before I'm gonna pull up my channel here so I can. I know I need to move on to trifocals, but okay, hang on. Let me open this up here. Excuse me, I get snotty when I cry. I don't know why it gets me. It's only when I'm reading it out loud, and I don't know why. I don't know why. Okay, let's go over here. I want to see if you got. I can't tell. Christmas tree story first, please. Absolutely. Okay, give me a second here. Now, when I was a little girl, my father, I got to tell you something. My father worked for the Toronto Hydro as a light repairman when I was a little girl. And you know, sometimes he'd come home for lunch or he'd get a ride home from work on one of the trucks. And the trucks were these great big utility trucks, like you would see them today. But they were burgundy and black. The Toronto Hydro trucks were burgundy and black. And they had ladders, not cherry pickers. My dad had his heart attack about 2 years after the cherry picker. But I got to tell you, I'll tell you all about that in a minute. And we talked about the old days. We all miss those days. Well, we got to make our own, don't we? We got to make our own traditions and new things. Anyway, I saw a big burgundy utility truck the other day, and my heart stopped. For a split second, I was standing on my front porch, and my dad was walking up the walkway from a Toronto Hydro truck. Isn't that weird? And I meant to phone my brother and tell him, because my brother went with my dad once on his night rounds, on his night shift. And when I'll tell you the Christmas tree story in a second. And when they finally, there was one ladder truck they called the Widowmaker, because the ladder was so old that grease from boots had it soaked and been ground into the rungs. And hydro men are fixing lights and stuff, rain or shine, all night long, all day. It was a 24-hour, they had shifts. And my dad, when they finally got the cherry pickers, I think his name was Smitty. Is my dad's friend Smitty. Or was it Mr. Christie? because he used to say, Mr. Christie, you make good cookies. Anyway, they took the truck, the Widowmaker out, and they extended the ladder all the way up. And they drove it right under a fucking bridge. Snapped the ladder right off. But my ex and I got along great until we got electricity. Anyway, my dad actually broke 2 ribs in a cherry picker because there was a big ice storm. My mom was still alive. He cracked 2 ribs, sorry. My mom was still alive. I remember that. And there was a huge storm and power was out all over Toronto. And my dad worked a 24-hour shift. And he got so angry because the amount of overtime he racked up, they took it all in taxes. So he got a normal paycheck for working overtime on a 24-hour shift. And in that shift, he slipped in the bucket because it was icy and cracked his ribs. I remember that. Anyway, Christmas story. Christmas tree. This reminds me, maybe that's why I get a little emotional. This reminds me of the very first time I remember eating in a restaurant. Okay? When we were kids, when I was a kid, takeout and restaurant food was like a rare and special occasion. So rare that whenever we had a birthday, Mom would ask us what we wanted for supper. Bob's was usually macaroni and cheese with lots of bacon. My mom made the best macaroni and cheese out of very little. And I remember for my 7th birthday, Mom asked me what I wanted for supper. And I said, 2 great big pizzas from Pepe's. And they did. They ordered 2 pizzas. But the very first time I ate in a restaurant was going to the Toronto Hydro Christmas tree. Right? And I asked Dad, what is a Christmas tree? And he said, you'll see. Because we knew we had a Christmas tree. Right? We were going to get a Christmas tree. And we all went out to the diner. And I don't know. I can't remember what we ate. For some reason, I thought it was breakfast because it was a Saturday. And we were going to the Christmas tree at Dad's work. They had rented a big hall. And everybody sat in the seats. And there was a great big... And I remember thinking it was the biggest Christmas tree I ever saw was on the stage. I don't remember anything about what happened there. I remember eating in a restaurant for the first time. And going to the Christmas tree. And my brother Bob and I getting presents handed to us in our seats. And mine was a spirograph. I spent days with that spirograph. I saved up pennies to buy different colored pens. But I got a spirograph. So that's my Christmas tree story. So whenever I hear about the Christmas tree at the church, it takes me back to a very, very, I must have been 4 or 5, because I don't remember anything other than the tree on the stage and sitting in a big auditorium with my mom and my dad and my brother Bob, because we were the youngest, and getting a spirograph. Isn't that wild? We went to eat once a year on the day we went Christmas shopping. My dad hated fast food, so he always went to a steakhouse. You know what? Howie and I used to do that. When we would go shopping for the kids, we would do our Christmas, spirograph. Do you even know? Does anybody not know what a spirograph is? Anyway, Howie and I, when we lived in Colburn, we would get a babysitter or whatever, right? And we would go all day, and we would go shopping for the kids on a Saturday. And we would go out, and usually we would go out to like a pizza place or like a Bellamy's. We'd have a nice dinner because it was rare that we actually went out. But this is the thing. Now, I want you to think about this. I know, and balsam's my favorite. I don't like spruce. They smell like cat pee to me. I like a balsam, right? A fir tree. My favorite is a Fraser fir. They're the Cadillac of Christmas trees as far as I'm concerned. But I forgot what I was going to say. I'm 53 and still have my spirograph. Grandkids love it. Oh my God, barefoot chickens. I would love, you know what? And you know, I was talking with, anyway, um, I think when I was little, and turn the pen and get pretty patterns. Yes, I'm ready. I'm originally from Buffalo. You're bringing back my winter memories. Oh, thank you, Judy. Well, I think now this is something I want everybody to ponder. Just a little thing there. Is do you look at our generation, and because eating out in a restaurant was so rare and takeout was so rare, that it became it's like bacon and eggs. When I was a kid, bacon and eggs were once a month on a Saturday or a Sunday. No, Saturday. Mom would get up and make bacon and eggs and fried potatoes with onions and blood pudding and all that stuff. Racks of toast. But the thing is somewhere in my brain, I associated takeout food and junk food with special occasions. And so every day became a special occasion. Not every day, but, eating out, like going to Kentucky Fried Chicken, my kids were like, oh, God, really? Okay. But to Howie and I, it was like, hey, we craved this shit when we were kids. I remember going to the diner with my parents for breakfast for the Christmas tree. I remember Chinese food takeout once, the pizzas on my birthday, and Mom and Dad went to the big new Nob Hill Farms. This was just before my mom died, but a year before my mom died. And Mom wanted to see the big new Nob Hill Farms because my mom was pretty agoraphobic. She didn't go anywhere without my dad. I don't even think she left the house. And on the way home, I'll never forget the smell of the butcher area in Nob Hill Farms. It was huge. It was the beginning of the big superstores, grocery stores. And we ate at A&W on the way home. It was my first burger. All right. Who wants another chapter? I remember eating in a restaurant on our way, like traveling meant restaurant food. It was really exciting. And I remember eating in a restaurant on our way to North Bay to visit Marganell Atkins. You remember me talking about Marganell Atkins? I don't know if that was another day or whatever. But we stopped at a restaurant. It was called The Voyageur. And I wanted a hamburger and French fries. And I didn't want anything on my hamburger except cheese. Because I was one of those kids who didn't like change. If I found something I liked, leave it alone. Well, they brought me a cheeseburger with everything on it. And I was so upset because it's not what I wanted. And Dad said, for God's sakes, and he took the hamburger and he scraped all the stuff off except for the cheese. And he said, eat it. I said, but it's still got stuff on it. He said, eat it. And that's when I discovered that mustard, ketchup, and relish were really good on a cheeseburger. You know what I mean? Etch-a-Sketch. Oh my God, yeah. And Kerplunk. We have, in Hull, there is this weird-ass multicolored plastic structure. And to most people, it's ugly as shit. And it is ugly. It doesn't look anything, but the colors and the plastic remind me of Kerplunk. Oh, the blizzard of 77. Yes. You know why? I got the day off school. January 10th, 1977, on my 13th birthday. I got off at 10. We just got to school, just got settled into our lessons, and they called all the buses back. I got the day off for my birthday because of a snowstorm. God, thanks for the memories. I remember when I was pregnant with Briar, so that was the winter of 1992. We had a snowstorm so bad in Peterborough. We were in a basement apartment that had stairs coming down to the door. We were so snowed in that our car had to be winched out of the driveway by a tow truck. Howie had to go through the apartment upstairs to get out of the house, and I have a picture somewhere of him standing on top of our car, and you can't see our car, and he shoveled out the stairs from there. That was 92. Shook it clear to the page. Kerplunk. Pick up sticks. Yeah, that's where Kerplunk came from, originated. And Tinker Toys. Tinker Toys. And I remember the Christmas after my mother died. My dad got catering in. I shit the bed. Honest to God, I pooped the bed because Dad got catering in, and it was all like cold meats and pickles and salads and stuff. All I ate was salami and dill pickles. I just gorged on salami and dill pickles, and I crapped the bed. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. All right. Let's read one more chapter. Okay? We had a game called Rebound. God, we got good at that game. Rebound. It was with marble. It was like a miniature shuffleboard, but it had marbles with rings around them. Did anybody ever remember Rebound? Okay, chapter 32 and the last chapter for tonight. Grasshoppers walking. After Christmas, got the wrong glasses on. There we go. There's still 27 people here, so I never had Lincoln Logs. I think that must have been an American thing. My first daughter was born in 1977. I was pregnant when the blizzard hit. I was pregnant with Briar. And it was November. No, it was the beginning of December. And I was not quite 7 months pregnant with Briar and I was terrified. All right, chapter 32, Grasshoppers walking. Oh, and by the way, my brothers had a racing car set. I actually bought one. Arthur actually got one for Christmas one year, and him and Howie put it all together on our little living room floor in that basement apartment. And they played racing cars. My brothers had that. You know the tracks with the guns? They'd put talcum powder on the tracks to make them shoot up dust, smoke like stuff. And when they would go to school, I would go in their room because they would leave it set up on the floor, and I would play with their race cars. Does that make me a boy in a girl's body? Just asking. I climbed trees. I played ball. Okay? I was a tomboy. Oh, weebles! Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. I'll never forget. My cousin Mary Jane and I were walking with my Aunt Toots down Pape Avenue towards where we were still living just before we moved. And Aunt Toots slipped on the ice. And I now look at that and go, that's terrifying. Because Aunt Toots was in her 40s then, probably close to 50, right? And she slipped and then came right back up, and Mary Jane just about pissed her pants. And I said, what? And I said, are you okay, Aunt Toots? And Mary Jane went, weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. And then I couldn't help but laugh. And chapter 32, Grasshoppers walking. After Christmas, there were a few snowy Sundays, but Pa made a bobsled of split willows, and they all went to Sunday school, snug in the new coat and furs, the shawl and muffler. One morning, Pa said the Chinook was blowing. The Chinook was a warm wind from the northwest. In a day, it melted the snow away, and Plum Creek was running full. Then came rains, pouring day and night. Plum Creek roared, humping down its middle, and swirled far beyond its low banks. Then the air was mild, and the creek was tame again. Suddenly the plums and the willow blossoms and their new leaves uncurled. The prairies were green with grass, and Mary and Laura and Carrie ran barefoot over the fresh softness. Every day was warmer than the day before, till the hot summer came. It was time for Laura and Mary to go to school, but they did not go that year because Pa must go away again, and Ma wanted them at home with her. The summer was very hot, dry. Hot winds blew and there was no rain. One day Pa came in to dinner and he said, "The grasshoppers are hatching. The hot sun is bringing them out of the grounds and up through the ground like popping corn." Laura ran out to see. The grass on the knoll was hopping full of tiny green things. Laura caught one in her hands and looked at it. Its wee small wings and its tiny legs and its little head and even its eyes were the color of the grass. It was so very tiny and so perfect. Laura could hardly believe it would ever be a big, brown, ugly grasshopper. "They'll be big fast enough," said Pa, eating every growing thing. Day by day, more and more grasshoppers hatched out of the ground. Green grasshoppers of all sizes were swarming everywhere and eating. The wind could not blow loud enough to hide the sound of their jaws nipping and gnawing and chewing. They ate all the green garden rows. They ate the green potato tops. They ate the grass and the willow leaves and the green plum thickets and the small green plums. They ate the whole prairie bare and brown, and they grew. They grew large and brown and ugly. Their big eyes bulged and their horny legs took them hopping everywhere. Thick over all the ground they were hopping, and Laura and Mary stayed in the house. There was no rain, and the days went by hotter and hotter, uglier and uglier, and filled with the sound of grasshoppers, until it seemed more than could be borne. "Oh, Charles," Ma said one morning, "it seems to me I just can't bear one more day of this." Ma was sick. Her face was white and thin, and she sat down tired as she spoke. "I'm going to say she's pregnant with Grace." Pa did not answer. For days he had been going out and coming in with a still tight face. He did not sing or whistle any more. It was worst of all when he did not answer Ma. He walked to the door and stood looking out. Even Carrie was still. They could feel the heat of the day beginning and hear the grasshoppers. But the grasshoppers were making a new sound. Laura ran to look out at them, excited, and Pa was excited too. "Caroline," he said, "here's a strange thing. Come and look." All across the dooryard, the grasshoppers were walking shoulder to shoulder and end to end, so crowded that the ground seemed to be moving. Not a single one hopped. Not one turned its head. As fast as they could go, they were all walking west. Ma stood beside Pa, looking. Mary asked, "Oh, Pa, what does it mean?" And Pa said, "I don't know." He shaded his eyes and looked far to the west and east. "It's the same as far as the eye can see. The whole ground is crawling west." Ma whispered, "Oh, if they would only all go away." They all stood staring at the strange sight. Only Carrie climbed onto her high chair and beat the table with her spoon. "In a minute, Carrie," Ma said. She kept on watching the grasshoppers walking by. There was no space between them and no end to them. "I want my breakfast," Carrie shouted. No one else moved. Finally, Carrie shouted, almost crying, "Ma, Ma!" "There, you shall have your breakfast," Ma said, turning around, and then she cried out, "My goodness!" Grasshoppers were walking over Carrie. They came pouring in the eastern window, side by side and end to end, across the windowsill and down the wall and over the floor. They went up the legs of the table and the benches and Carrie's high stool, under the table and benches and all over the table and benches and Carrie. They were walking west. "Shut the window," said Ma. Laura ran on the grasshoppers to shut it. Pa went outdoors and around the house. He came in and said, "Better shut the upstairs windows. Grasshoppers are as thick walking up the east side of the house as they are on the ground, and they're not going around the attic window, they're going right in." All up the wall across the roof went the sound of their raspy claws crawling. The house seemed full of them, and Ma and Laura swept them up and threw them out the western window. None of them came in from the west, though the whole western side of the house was covered with grasshoppers that had walked over the roof and were walking down to the ground and going on west with the others. That whole day long, the grasshoppers walked west. All the next day, they went on walking west. And all the third day, they walked without stopping. No grasshopper turned out of its way for anything. They walked steadily over the house. They walked over the stable. They walked over Spot until Pa shut her up in the stable. They walked into Plum Creek and drowned, and those behind kept walking in and drowning until dead grasshoppers choked the creek and filled the water, and live grasshoppers walked across them. All day the sun beat hot on the house. All day it was full of the crawling sound that went up the wall and over the roof and down. All day grasshoppers' heads with bulging eyes and grasshoppers' legs clutching were thick along the bottom edge of the shut windows. All day they tried to walk up the sleek glass and fell back, while thousands more pushed up and tried and fell. Ma was pale and tight. Pa did not talk, and his eyes could not twinkle. Laura could not shake the crawling sound out of her ears, nor brush it off her skin. The fourth day came, and the grasshoppers went on walking. The sun shone hotter than ever with a terrible bright light. It was nearly noon when Pa came from the stable shouting, "Caroline, Caroline, look outdoors! The grasshoppers are flying!" Laura and Mary ran to the door. Everywhere the grasshoppers were spreading their wings and rising from the ground. More and more of them filled the air, flying higher and higher until the sunshine dimmed and darkened and went out as it had done when the grasshoppers came. Laura ran outdoors. She looked straight up at the sun through a cloud that seemed almost like snowflakes. It was a dark cloud, gleaming, glittering, shimmering bright, and whiter and higher and whiter and whiter as she looked higher and further into it. And it was rising instead of falling. The cloud passed over the sun and went on far to the west until it could be seen no longer. There was not a grasshopper left in the air or on the ground, except here and there a crippled one that could not fly but still hobbled westward. The stillness was like the stillness after a storm. Ma went into the house and threw herself down in the rocking chair. "My Lord," she said, "my Lord." The words were praying, but they sounded like thank you, thank you. Laura and Mary sat on the doorstep. They could sit on the doorstep now. There were no grasshoppers. "How still it is," Mary said. Pa leaned in the doorway and said earnestly, "I would like someone to tell me how they all knew at once that it was time to go, and how they all knew which was the way west and their ancestral home." But no one could tell him. I'm at home alone most of the time. This group has truly blessed me. So glad I found Beverly and the community. I'm just a part of the community, honey. I'm just the face. Doesn't mean I'm any different than anybody else. What a happy place to hang out, eh? It was always so good to find a true smile in this world today. On my 7th birthday, I got a baby carriage. Oh my God. I got a baby carriage. That push would make music, and the round top would go spinning. Wow. I got a perambulator, a beautiful navy blue perambulator with white, it had white pinstriping and curls and a white bonnet. And I was really little. And my Aunt Jane had sent me, I think it was my cousin Marnie's toys. There was a crib and a high chair, miniature crib and high chair, and they were made of wood. And I put that crib next to my bed, and I put my baby in it. And I had a little iron that worked, and it was a kind of a turquoise color. And, you know, I had it was the same color as my Susie Homemaker oven. We should make this a weekly thing we do on Thursday nights normally. But I'm doing it more often because I'm not reading any chapters. I'm not reading any books. Recording any books until the fall, early winter, when the windows are shut and there's no fans running or pool pumps running or four-wheelers going up and down the road. So listen, guys, it's 10 o'clock. I have an hour to finish editing tomorrow's video on our half-acre homestead. Yeah, the Susie Homemaker oven. My sister got me that. I remember my sister and brother would work after school nights when they were in high school doing cleaning at Phillips. I just remember it was Phillips. I think it was an electric company or something. Something. And I think that was the year my sister or my brother got a guitar. I got the hiccups. So, this is Mrs. Wolfe from Reading with Beverly Wolfe saying you just never know when a video short's going to come up and I'm going to say, hey, you want to read Little House? Because you know what? We've only got this much left to read, and then we're on to Farmer Boy. And Farmer Boy is one of my favorite books because they demonstrate the true self-sufficiency of farm life back then. Oh, I'm thank you. I'm so grateful. I love you guys. Take care. God bless. I have an hour's work yet before I go to bed. All right? Mwah. I love you.